All right, everyone. Welcome to the International Colloquium. I'm Dr. Pankaj Desai. I am the chair of this commission, the Global Dimension of Student Development. And today I would like to take a moment to welcome you before we get started to the very first session of the 2024 International Colloquium. This year, we are very proud to present a series of 4 webinars around the topic of socio-emotional well-being and exploration of international graduate students' voices. I would like to remind all of you that this is an event which is sponsored by ACPA's Commission for Global Dimensions of Student Development, and it is dedicated to giving international graduate students a voice related to their experiences in the United States while completing their graduate studies and seeking professional and faculty appointments in higher education. It is our sincere hope that their voices will provide administrators, staff, and faculty working in higher education with insights to the ways in which they can best be supported throughout their academic journeys and career transitions. I would also like to share with you that we are really excited that our commission is actively recruiting for our directorate board this year. So we are seeking new members for our directorate board, and involvement in the directorate board provides the opportunity for ongoing engagement with colleagues and a shared interest in international education and cross-cultural learning. So we have up to 11 new open positions. The application deadline is Monday, May 20th of 2024 at 11:59 p.m. Central Time. So I invite all of us who are interested here to attend any one of our 2 online info sessions. The first one is happening on April 19th and the second one is on April 24th. So the application and the info session related information can all be found on our link tree, and I'll drop that in chat here in a moment. And I wish you all a great learning experience. And with this, I pass it on to our current faculty in residence, Dr. Bass. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So my name is Mary Ann Bodine Al-Sharif. My students call me Dr. Bass. I'm an assistant professor of higher education in the Department of Human Studies here at the University of Alabama in Birmingham. And I am also currently serving as the faculty in residence for the Commission for the Global Dimensions of Student Development. But before we begin, I wanted to take a moment to share my land acknowledgement. I'm also going to put back up here on the screen for you the land acknowledgement for our commission. And I will drop mine here. I think it's important today, as we meet, that we remember and acknowledge the practices of settler colonialism that has occurred here within the United States, and that we uplift the perspectives into different ways of thinking about this acknowledgement and the places that we reside and do our work. So, with that said, I want to talk about today's colloquium session. And so today's session in particular is titled Why It Matters, Sharing International Student Stories. And we have 2 presentations for this session. Our first presentation, we are spotlighting Dr. Gudrun Nyunt, Katie Koo, Patty Witkowsky, and Mindy Andinos. And unfortunately, Mindy was not able to be with us, but we want to acknowledge the work that she's done with this great crew in their recent book publication titled International Student Identities and Mental Well-Being Beyond the Single Story. Our second presentation features Dr. Catherine Wehlburg, who serves as the editor-in-chief for New Directions. Dr. Wehlburg was and has guided our commission in the submission of the works that are going to be presented throughout the colloquium sessions this month and into May as a collected volume for the New Directions Journal. She will be sharing about New Directions and how it has facilitated this work, and we will hold questions for both of these sessions to the very end. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to stop sharing, and I am going to turn this over to our first group. Please take the floor.
Right. Thank you so much. Let me just share my screen. Hi, everyone. My name is Gudrun Nyunt. I use she, her pronouns. I'm an assistant professor of higher education at Northern Illinois University. And so I'm joining you today from the occupied lands of the Anishinaabe peoples, also known as the Council of the Three Fires. And within ACPA, I've had the honor of serving as chair of this very commission a few years back, and I'm currently your vice president of membership. And so I'm here today to talk about this book that we recently published, International Student Identities and Mental Wellbeing Beyond the Single Story. And so if you're interested, our book is available for free as the online version, and then for a small charge as the paperback version. And you have the QR code here as well as our link in order to check that out. But first, to talk to you about kind of the history and how we, why we even decided to write this book, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Patty Witkowsky.
Thank you, Gudrun. Hello, I'm Dr. Patty Witkowsky from the University of Colorado in Colorado Springs. I use she, her pronouns, and as Gudrun noted, I'm going to share how the idea for our book came about. So while the importance of international student mental well-being has always been a concern, in the mid-2010s, as the rise in mental health supports in higher education increased broadly, conversations within the ACPA Commission for Global Dimensions of Student Development focused specifically on the need to address mental well-being for international students. As the Commission focused on international education and we also focus on international students, in 2019, these conversations led to the Commission hosting a very successful in-person and virtual International Colloquium on Mental Health that was led by Dr. Ann Hornak from Central Michigan University, and she was the Commission's faculty in residence at the time. Given this demonstrated need from practitioners, as seen from the great turnout during the International Colloquium in 2019, we sought to provide further information about how to support international student mental well-being as a leadership of the Commission. And so within the leadership, Gudrun was part of that, as well as past, current, and future faculty and residents. We gathered virtually in May 2020. So we basically had nothing else going on. We were in the midst of stay-at-home orders in many areas of the US, and writing a book sounded like a great idea at the time. So we met to discuss how we could write a co-edited book to include the experiences of practitioners, along with scholars in the field of international students, to provide a resource that was grounded in both theory and practice. So that's really how our book began. And next, we're going to spend the majority of the time for our presentation talking, having my co-editors will share a little bit more about the content of the book and demonstrate its usefulness to those working with international students and the intersectionality within the broader population. Thank you.
Thank you, Patty. And thank you so much for having me today as a speaker on this very important topic, and so happy to be in this community and the International Colloquium. Thank you so much for having this wonderful topic and greatly important session. My name is Katie. I use she and her. I am an associate professor in the counseling department at the University of Georgia. I am also a past faculty in residence for the Commission. And I'm also a huge fan of International Colloquium. I've been benefiting a lot from this International Colloquium. So thank you so much for having me. And it's my great pleasure to talk about the International Student Mental Health, which is the main topic of the book. Like Patty just mentioned, and when we gathered for the International Colloquium in 2019 for the International Mental Health, we were really discussing what is the uniqueness of the international student mental health, how their experiences are different compared to the domestic students in terms of the mental health. So I wanted to highlight what are the uniqueness and what are the unique challenges related to the mental health. And as we could understand, international students, this is their first time being here in a foreign country, and definitely they go through the adjustment and acculturation. Just because of they are coming and they are far away from their home country and the primary support system, so they are by themselves. The adjustment and acculturation is also related to the social isolation. Although they have people here, well, it really depends on their, personality, the program. For example, if international students, they are in a STEM field, they might encounter many number of international students in the STEM field. But if they are in a humanity or any other professional school, then they might have less international students in their cohort. So depending on the program or the situation and also the institution, maybe there will be more international students in the West Coast compared to Wyoming or North Dakota. I'm sorry that I'm just picking some of the states, but that was so true because I still remember the number of international students in Michigan compared to international students in New York City. So depending on where they are, the cultural adjustment, acculturation, social isolation, and loneliness are so diverse. And also there's ambiguity and uncertainty in a different level. Although international students, they are really striving to survive, and they did a really great job in here to survive and successfully complete their degree. Many of them, they still don't know about their future. They are really uncertain. What should I do after graduation? Is this okay? Who should I talk to? Am I on the right track? Because they don't really have a role model or a mentor in the first time person in the United States as a foreign student. There are a lot of uncertainty and they don't really know who to ask and how to ask. In addition to those very unique challenges that international students encounter in terms of the mental health, there are a different type of barriers. So we put language barrier, cultural barrier, and institutional barrier to help seeking. Firstly, around 70% of international students are coming from Asian countries, and many of Asian students, they speak English as second language, which means when they seek help, when they are in a counseling center, they are in a situation of doing this language testing. I heard from my international student that whenever they take this mental health assessment, they feel like this is not a mental health assessment, but this is another version of English testing. They should bring this dictionary and then try to translate because they didn't know what this means. So it's another level of stress because of the language. And also because of the language barrier, it's not always easy for international students to 100% reveal their feelings, their emotions, their struggles, their challenges. So that's one piece of the barrier. There's more barriers, the cultural barrier. As we all know, for many international students, they are not really used to go to mental health counseling or the help seeking facility just because it's not very useful. This not very frequently happen in their home country. And there's a huge stigmatism toward mental health or mental illness. So instead of revealing and seeking help, international students, they put those in themselves because it's not their culture. I mean, they are not used to reveal those weakness to public spaces. So a lot of time, international students consider themselves being in a mental health or seeking help as the sign of weakness and also the sign of lacking something. So although generations are changing, and I hope that there will be some differences, but still the cultural barriers are huge, and then it prevents them to seek help for the mental health services. And lastly, institutional barrier is also an important part. If you contact the counseling center at the university, and you frequently might hear the message, you have 6-month wait list. I mean, okay, it's now April, but the next available counselor will be October of 2015 or something. So I'm not exaggerating, but as a formal mental health counselor, I thought this is a reality. And also institutional barrier, not only for the waitlist, but the resources for helping international students is lacking. And also the approach to help international students is something different than the approach to help domestic students. So I saw that there's some limited resources to provide culturally relevant and culturally sensitive mental health resources. So I just mentioned the very brief things, but there are a different type of barriers and layers that international students hesitate to seek help. So I'm gonna stop here and I'm gonna take it over to my colleagues to talk further about the topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. And so one of the things about our book, right, that that is unique is that we really focused on intersectional identities. And so a lot of times when we talk about international students, we talk about them as one group, right? But we know that international students come from lots and lots of different countries. They have different demographic, right? Different social identities in terms of sexual orientation, gender identity, socioeconomic status, all of the things, right? But we don't always consider those. Or we hone in on one specific nationality, right? There's lots of literature that says this is about Chinese international students because they're the largest group. But again, we're not very good as a field to really dive into those intersectional identities and really consider how those shape international students' mental well-being and their experiences. And so one of the things we really wanted to do with this book is dive into these different stories, right? And so I have 4 story examples up here that I'll share a little bit, right, with all of you, just to get you thinking about how these experiences might be different, right? And so think in story 1, we have a Chinese undergraduate student who identifies as LGBTQ+. There's a large Chinese community on campus, right? But there's also a large domestic LGBTQ+ community on campus, but there's not a lot of overlap between those two. And so for that international student, right, one of the things that might really impact their mental well-being is the struggle of trying to find a community. Because while there are some communities that align with one of their identities, there isn't a community that kind of embraces all of the identities, right? And so that could be a really unique struggle for that student. Now let's take a look at story 2, right? What if we have a Saudi Arabian graduate student? They are an expert in the field, but their expertise is often dismissed due to their accent. They are on a scholarship, right, that requires them to return to their home country. They're also a parent. And so there's challenges around work-life integration, right? They also knowing they're going to go back to their home country and being a parent, they're really focused on teaching children about their home culture, right? And wanting to ease some of that transition that their children are going to face when they go back, when they leave the United States, right? And so that student's experience is going to be really drastically different, right, than our Chinese undergraduate student from story 1. For this student, some of the mental health challenges might be related to cultural adjustment or trying to navigate, right? How much do we acculturate versus how much do we continue to kind of live by our home country? How do we navigate parenting within these 2 different cultural contexts? How do we, for many of us, right, who've been graduate students, how do we even balance grad school with parenting and all the other things that we have going on? And so again, right, very different and unique mental health challenges for that story. Story 3, let's say we have an African undergraduate student, right? They probably had some perceptions about the US pre-arrival, right? I was an international student, and across the world, right, we get US media, we get TV shows, we get songs, music, art, right, all the things. But they portray a certain picture of the United States that usually doesn't perfectly align, right, with reality. And so they probably came into the US with some preconceived notion about what this would be like, right? And they learned about the US, often in other countries, right? We learn about the United States as this melting pot of different cultures. And there's talk about racism, right? But then they come to the United States and they actually experience racism. And so there can often be a disconnect between how, you know, they might have learned and conceptualized race being in the majority in their home country to what it is like being Black in the United States. Add to that they might have an undiagnosed learning disability, right? And so that adds another layer of there's cultural barriers to understanding what the learning disability is and to understanding how to seek help within an institutional context. And so again, right, we see there's lots of kind of unique mental health challenges around understanding racism in the United States, navigating this learning disability, navigating some of that culture shock from what we thought the United States would be like to what it actually is. And then finally, let's say story 4, we have an Austrian international student who's gender non-binary, right? And so being from a European background, we know that a lot of our European international students have a little bit of an easier time, right? Building close relationships with domestic students in the United States, but they don't have a lot of friendship with international students. But they're still impacted, right, by immigration policies. And so when they graduate, right? And they're starting to think about jobs and what are the next steps, they might not have that support network of other international students, right? To talk through some of those challenges. And their domestic students, though they were a close friend, might not really understand what it's like to be an international student, to be an immigrant in this country, and navigating some of those challenges, right? As an international individual in this country. And so I share these 4 stories really to highlight, right, how unique international students are and how unique every single international student story is going to be based on these intersecting identities, and how when we want to work with and support international students' mental well-being, it really is about understanding their holistic stories, understanding all of their identities and how those come into play and how salient those are during different times in their lives, right, to really understand how we can support international students. And in our book, we go into some of those identities, right? And throughout it, we really try to highlight how these intersectional identities can come into play. And so I'll do another plug for our book. As I mentioned in the beginning, you have the QR code here and the link. And our book is available for free for the online version. And so please check out that book. We have some kind of research-based chapters in there. We also have some case studies in there. So once you've kind of read and digested some of that content, it gives you a chance to read through some of those case studies and think through, right? Like, how might you react in that situation? Or what might you do to support that international student? And again, I just want to thank the Commission for Global Dimension for allowing us to be here today and to share a little bit about our book. And we're excited to also answer questions later on.
Thank you so much. You guys are amazing. We're going to go ahead and we are going to move to our next presentation with Catherine Wehlburg, and she is with New Directions. And Catherine, we will give you the screen now.
That is wonderful, and I am having obviously technology problems, and I apologize. But that is on me, not on. There we go. This is what happens when I'm used to working on my desktop, and now I'm working on my laptop, and that makes things so very interesting. But there you go. So I am thrilled to talk to you all a little bit about New Directions for Teaching and Learning. And I think that for those of you who don't know much about New Directions for Teaching and Learning, it is comes out 4 times a year. It is a source book. So it is a journal, but it's not a peer-reviewed journal the way many of the other peer-reviewed journals are. But it does allow for some wonderful ways to share information.
Catherine, you're muted again.
Okay, we'll try it this way. Does that work? Yay. Okay, I see people nodding. That's great. Fabulous.
Hi, Catherine. Could we also request you to turn on your presentation mode?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I thought it was, and it is clearly not. So hang on one second. Yep. No, I'm glad you said that. So let's do that.
Yes, now we see it. Perfect.
Now we see it. Okay, success. Thank you all very much for your patience. But New Directions for Teaching and Learning is part of an overall series that is put out. There are new directions for several different areas. There's new directions for community colleges, for institutional research, and for several others. And the idea behind this is to try and let readers of the volumes know about current and future directions in teaching and learning, which is kind of where the name comes from. And it is designed in such a way that it is a quick move into publication. If for those of you who have ever submitted a manuscript for publication, you know that that is a sometimes a years-long process, if not many months in that overall process, just from the time you submit a manuscript. And by the time things get out in the areas of teaching and learning, often it's old. And so this was a way to try and combat some of the time that it takes to get information out of the hands of scholars, researchers, and practitioners into the hands of everyone who needs to read about that. So, so by illuminating context and content about these new directions for teaching and learning, the volume is able to provide information relatively quickly. And so when someone submits a full manuscript to New Directions for Teaching and Learning, it is sometimes a matter of only a month or two before that information is live and shared with the public. And that's one of the nice things about the overall concept of New Directions for Teaching and Learning. One of the things that we do not do as a publication is to accept individual manuscripts. Instead, what we do is we have special issues, special topics issues. And so the one that is going to be coming out soon that Marianne and others have talked about is one that is designed to be a special topic on international education. And so for those of you that are thinking about maybe finding some ways to start or continue a publication track, New Directions can be a way of doing that. And I've got some other information to share with you about how to do that when you're ready to look at that. Most of our readers are higher education administrators or faculty who are looking at this as a way to get a lot of information quickly. A lot of that is very practical information very quickly. And it is abstracted and indexed in several different areas, and you kind of see that list of the ways that that individuals find what we have in New Directions. The goal of this, though, is really to try and get practical information into the hands of faculty and administrators as quickly as possible. You can find New Directions online if you, and there's a link to the to the issue, and many of our academic libraries they subscribe to this. So many of you should have access to this through your academic libraries, and you can download any of them. Previously, about 5 years ago, we moved to an online only version. It used to be a print copy that would be snail mailed out. And now we've moved to a fully online journal, and everything is digitized. So you can go back to the beginning and find every single issue of New Directions for Teaching and Learning online through that link. So when as New Directions typically is created by the issue editor who has proposed a topic, and then that issue editor finds chapter authors to create the full journal. So, like I said before, it's not necessarily a peer-reviewed journal, but it is one that is looked at and by many individuals before it actually goes out into publication. That gives the issue editor a lot of control over that special topic and how that special topic is presented, and allows for individuals then who are reading it to either read through the whole journal as from from front to back, or to choose particular chapters to pull out and use those. So it's not a book in that the chapters flow from one to another, but it's not a journal necessarily where each manuscript is disconnected. So with New Directions for Teaching and Learning, they are connected, but it's not designed to be a book and read like a book would be read. So it really kind of is when people sometimes ask, what is New Directions for Teaching and Learning? And we call it a source book because it's not really a journal, but it's not a book. And so it's somewhere in the middle of all of those. So if you are interested in potentially thinking about something that you think would make for a really good issue, the best way to kind of start that conversation is to send me an email. I'm the editor-in-chief. I have been doing this for a little over 10 years with New Directions for Teaching and Learning, and I will kind of walk you through what needs to be in a proposal. It is, and what I'm looking for in a proposal is an idea that is substantive, that people who read New Directions for Teaching and Learning would be interested in reading about. And then I also look to see what the ideas are for individual chapter topics. The entire issue is usually between about 35,000 to 40,000 words. And usually they have around 10 chapters. So if you think about that individually, each chapter is between 3,500 and 4,000 words. Now that we are online, there is actually a lot of flexibility in terms of how we can move through the process. So if there's one that's a little bit longer, we can easily adjust to that, or a little bit shorter. Whereas before, when we were in a print journal, there were actual printing costs that we had to take into consideration. So having it be online makes it a lot more flexible for the way that we do this. We've also found that that some topics that get proposed are end up with a lot of interest on the part of the authors. And so we have also done kind of double issues where it's actually a two-part issue that comes out so that it can contain more information on a particular topic with that. So it is a relatively easy process to go through from the point of view of a issue editor or a chapter author, because we have streamlined the process as much as possible, so we don't have to send it out to peer reviewers. We don't have to do those things. That is all handled by the issue editor and myself. The issue editor creates the topic, creates the call for submissions, or invites people to write a chapter, gathers that, goes through a first round of editing, and then sends it to me. I go through a second round of editing, and often at that point, there's not a whole lot because the issue editor really has done a great job of making sure everything fits together reasonably well. And then I send it on to the people at Wiley who copy edit and get it into the online publication in very, very short order. So that makes it work very well to get information quickly in place. Sometimes people ask me, what are some of the most read topics that New Directions for Teaching and Learning has? And a lot of those focus on the scholarship of teaching and learning, and particular areas. I'm starting to see a lot more issues focused on teaching with AI, as you would expect, given that that is certainly something that is coming up more and more. And then certainly international education, and from multiple perspectives. Some of them are from the perspectives of the institution, some are from perspectives of the international students, and some are from the perspective of international or faculty who are teaching internationally or teaching students who are international. So there's a lot of different ways to look at doing this, and it's really limited by the thoughts that you might have for a particular topic or area. So if you're at all interested, either in potentially submitting a topic for New Directions for Teaching and Learning, or you just want to look back at some very, very good scholarship that's been done, you can go online and you can search across the issues that have, and there's a lot of really great stuff in there. And I think that, Marianne has done some great work in getting others involved in this. And so it's really exciting to see how each issue comes together. And I encourage you to look through, read them, and potentially think about a topic that may be something that you want to propose. And I'm also very happy to answer questions.
Thank you. Catherine, we'll ask if you'll exit screen and we will open up the floor for questions from our audience. Does anyone in the audience have questions for either one of our presenters today? Please feel free to either ask the question out or to drop it in the chat box. Ty, I see your hand up.
That was just a reaction. I didn't
Ah.
have any questions.
How about I get us started with a question for our first group, so you all can think about some questions you might like to ask. And so one of the questions is, what brought the group together? And why do you think this book matters most right now for our first presentation?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, right, as Patty was sharing a little bit, it really just became at the time when, we were in the midst of a global pandemic. We had just come off this really successful international colloquium focused on mental well-being. And so we really saw a need to talk about this. But I think that need has only continued to increase with the pandemic, right? Like we were writing through the pandemic, editing through the pandemic. But we also know that post-pandemic, we've seen a continued increase in mental health concerns. And so I think this book, even though it was envisioned pre-pandemic, right, is really important now as we're still kind of recovering from the pandemic, still dealing with a lot of the mental health stresses and impacts, long-term impacts, right, of living through a pandemic. And so to me, that would be one of the reasons why it's really important.
And I saw that we have a question in the chat. What strategies are used to help international students overcome the stigma of visiting a professional counselor?
You need help? Okay. Okay.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I don't know if my co-authors or co-editors want to join in. I think, right, there's no easy answer. And as I was talking about earlier, right, it really depends on those intersectional identities of how we approach it. But a lot of it is these personal connections and how we frame going to a counselor, right? An international student who comes from a culture where maybe seeking help, seeing a counselor is not really seen as kind of the common thing that you do, is not going to go on the university website and look up the counseling center and find the phone number and set up an appointment, right? But they might have developed a relationship with a faculty member or a student affairs professional and share some of their concerns there. And then in that conversation, right, we can encourage them to engage in help seeking. And use some of the language, right? Like maybe not say, go see a counselor, because that might be, even for our domestic students, right? That is scary language. But talking about, hey, do you think it would be helpful, right? You're talking to me about this. We actually have staff on campus, right? That you're going to be able to talk to and who might be able to help you sort through your thoughts and figure out how to address these challenges you're facing. So I think sometimes it's about adjusting your language, but really it starts earlier than that in building these relationships so that the international students have someone that they can come to where they feel comfortable talking about their challenges. And then as you kind of do that referral, right, to the counseling center, you can do that in a way that there already is some trust built, and you can use that trust to encourage them to go see someone.
And I would just highlight one of our chapters, I'll pop it here in the chat, that speaks specifically around language. And so hiring counseling staff that has multiple language abilities would be obviously open up the door for accessibility to students. Certainly we can't meet all of the language needs on your campus with all of the international students, but I think considering that when in hiring practices would also be very useful, because once that boundary can be eliminated, that might create increased access for specific populations of international students on the campus. And then potentially if those students, because we know a lot of international students have many cross relationships with other international students on their campus, that even if the language isn't there or if there isn't someone who speaks their peers' language, maybe having had the experience in the counseling center and hopefully a positive one, they can then also be a peer referral to say, I went, it was okay. And hopefully that might also open the door of access. But so I would definitely highlight that chapter that we have in the book as well.
We have another question for your group. It says, I'm in a program that is 98% international students. My colleagues invest heavily in wellness fairs that have minimal attendance. Does the panel have any suggestions on positive ways to encourage attendance?
So may I ask if this is, I'll just answer in case it is, if it's around internationals or graduate students, I know that if there's a way to partner with the coursework, that's going to be the best way. I'm assuming it says a program, so usually maybe that's graduate students. So if that's the case, but I think finding ways to partner with the faculty in that program to find some way to either utilize class time or encourage extra credit. I don't know, it's not really popular in graduate programs, but things like that I think would be useful as a start, because I think sometimes those broad programming pieces don't really pull people because they don't know the exact the exact outcome that they will have as a result of participating. So I think making it as strategic and as targeted to that specific population. And if it is a program, thinking academic program, and many, of course, our international students have a lot of additional pressures around academic performance, because that's often tied to their ability to stay in the US to continue their program. And so if there's a way to tie the participation in the wellness fair or the wellness activities to academic success and create that connection for the students, that may also be a potential way to create that draw to participate.
Another question from our community is, does it get easier as time goes on? I'm assuming for the international student, especially with the feeling of not belonging or being overwhelmed with system and the culture?
Yeah, that's a great question, right? And I think yes and no, right? There's always kind of these ups and downs. We used to talk about like the culture shock curve, right? Of like you first experience culture shock and then life is happy and you figure all the things out. And in reality, we know it's not like that, right? There's gonna come moments, and a lot of it with international students are external influences, right? There might be a new travel ban for the students who are impacted by that, right? That creates more feelings of not belonging, feeling overwhelmed, struggling with the system and the culture. If you're graduating and you're thinking about staying in the United States and trying to find a job in the United States and securing sponsorship, right? That can be a period of time that's really challenging. So I'd say overall, right? Like, yes, we tend to see that students, as they kind of find their community, build their networks, their support networks, right? Like things improve, but then there can be these kind of external events or even just, personal stuff that might happen that can make this really challenging again. So it often is kind of this like wave that you go through more than a curve that starts slow and gets better.
Another question, our audience is, thank you for the excellent presentation. Were there specific challenges discussed around limited access to employment as international students, thinking in terms of the impact of limited financial resources on mental health well-being?
Yeah, so we have I'm trying to think, we have at least one case study that talks about kind of the employment challenges or the challenges of finding employment. We talk about it more post-graduation. We do also have a chapter on kind of ambiguity, uncertainty, and some of the challenges that international students face. But yeah, right, financial well-being is definitely a big piece of our overall well-being. And so I think that is a challenge. And I see it at my own institution as we're cutting graduate assistantships. That drastically impacts, right, our international graduate students because they're limited to being able to only work on campuses. And so, yeah, those are really tricky things, right, to navigate. And actually had a program at my institution a week ago where we talked about that with some international grad students. And the biggest thing that I always tell students is you need to advocate for yourself, right? We've seen drastic changes happening on US college campuses when students band together and engage in social movements. And I think, again, right, there's a cultural piece for our international students that might not be comfortable, that might not be what you're used to doing, but that is a very effective way of getting the institution's attention. More effective than if I, as an assistant professor, right, say something. If there's a group of students outside of our graduate dean's office protesting about the elimination of graduate scholarships, right, that or graduate assistantships, that can have a big impact. And so finding some of these ways to really try to support each other and find that community, and figure out the ways, how can you engage in advocacy in the United States, right? That might be different from what you do in your home countries.
Based on your book or overall expertise in the literature, what type of career development challenges appear to contribute to well-being or mental health risk? And what types of mental health challenges are most common in relation to navigating career challenges?
Yeah, I think, right, I will continue to go back to, it always depends because we're thinking about intersectional identities, right? And so we're thinking about, like there's just so many different factors and each student's story is going to be different. But I think the biggest thing in terms of career development, right, is there's limitations on what you can do as an international student based on visa regulations. And so when I was a doctoral student, right, at the University of Maryland, it was a super common thing for everyone to have these like side hustles that on the one hand were really helpful in terms of financial well-being, but were also really helpful in terms of career development, right? And I wasn't able to engage in those because of my international student status. And once I got a green card through marriage, that drastically changed it, right? Suddenly I was like, oh, I can help edit this book. I can help do this. I can be on this professional association. I can do all these things, right? And then when you get close to graduation, there's this big challenge of, right, like, are you able to stay in the United States? And so I think for international students often, right, there's the struggle of like, do I kind of plan my career thinking I'm going to go back to my home country, or do I plan my career here? And both of those things might require different things, but you don't know which way it's going to work out until you're going through that process, right? And so that can be a really big challenge, and that can really impact your mental well-being because there's so much uncertainty and ambiguity and so many things that are just out of your control in that process.
Okay. Would it be useful if staff have good relationships with the counseling centers and the counseling center counselors?
Always.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would just add, I think us in student affairs, especially those of us that then teach in student affairs programs and our faculty, we find it very easy to create these partnerships and relationships, but helping sometimes faculty broadly need help to learn. They can create relationships, but they need help broadly to understand the importance of creating relationships with the staff so that when a student comes in and they are presenting with needs that are beyond the scope of their abilities, which then becomes an ethical issue of trying to help someone through something you're not actually trained to do. just to make sure that if they have that specific knowledge, but I think it's a two-way street, right? The counseling center should also be reaching out to academic programs and faculty, and so that hopefully those things can happen in both ways, and maybe opportunities for like international education offices to create mixers or get to know you activities during orientation times, or even really any time of the year where counseling staff are invited and are seen as people and are seen as accessible and not this scary barrier if a student is recommended or referred to the counseling center on campus.
Thank you.
Good.
See, we have an audience member who would like to ask a question. So Lynn Jane, could you go ahead and ask your question?
Yeah, thank you. I'm sorry, let me turn on my camera. Yeah, thank you so much for the book and thank you so much for the conversation. So I was working in student affairs in supporting international students, but I'm going to start a program in the fall to do a clinical mental health counseling. So I'm very excited because I want to work more with international students around the mental health. So I think my question, one is like I've talked to so many students, they're like, yeah, I saw some counselors at my school, but it's impossible for them to understand my experience as international students. Like, how can I share all my like over 20 years of like struggle with you in such short time? So I think one, I guess my question is kind of twofold. One is like, for me going into the field, I don't know if they have any suggestions or like recommendations for me, like resources around like international student and mental health. I mean, of course, I just purchased your books. I'm very looking forward to read that. So that's one. And another, I think is on the other hand is like, as I work in the field with other counselors, are there like, what are some of the things that you think that counselors need to know about international students that just more than like some like the more like surface level, like culture barriers or things, like what are some of the other things that you think that would be helpful for them to support international students? Because we can not only rely on one or two counselors who have that international student experience, we need a whole culture and a whole center. So thank you so much.
Yeah, and I put another book recommendation in the chat. Many of us also published or wrote chapters in that book, but it's titled Supporting International Students in U.S. Higher Education. And really what the entire book talks about is this need for an integrative approach, right? That it can't just be on the counseling center. It can't just be on the International Student Services and Scholars Office. It really needs to be everyone across the institution needs to be educated and ready to support international students. And we have a chapter in there that talks about cultural humility. And so really this idea, right, around there's so many different cultures and countries that our international students come from. So we're never going to be able to really know everything about every country, right, and culture, and knowing students' intersectional identities. It's just impossible to kind of relate, right, and understand everything that they're going through. But if we're approaching counseling and interactions with international students through cultural humility, that can give us the opportunity to ask questions, to be curious, and to engage in this continued learning, right, for ourselves, to learn more about this, about other countries and cultures. And so if as a counselor, right, you see you're going to have an appointment with an international student, the bare minimum is you can go to Google, right, and look up that country and that culture and at least learn a few things, right? And then really important, don't just stereotype based on like the 3 things that you've now learned, but actually take the time to listen to that student, right? But it might help you get a little bit in that frame of mind around what's needed. And so I think those are some of the things, right, that you can do to kind of prep yourself, but a lot of it is that learning. I think the other thing I would add is having at least a basic understanding of visa and immigration regulations could be really helpful, right? Because they can cause a lot of stress and anxiety for international students. And not that you have to be an expert on that, right? Because that's what International Students and Scholar Services does. But there's often, it is one of the things I've experienced as an international student, right? There's a dismissal of some of those fears, or just kind of weird misunderstandings around what that looks like. And that comes out in almost, right, like microaggressions or just statements that just reinforce that anxiety or that lack of understanding, right? When people are like, oh, but, and some of that, right, again, intersectional identities, probably because I look white. And so people were always like, why aren't you just a US citizen? And I was like, well, if it was that easy, right, we'd all have become US citizens the second we step foot onto this country. There's like a whole process, right? And lots of that is out of your control. So I think having at least that basic understanding that this is a hard process, that there's a lot of steps and a lot of it is not in the student's control, would be helpful, I think, for counselors.
Thank you. We're going to stop there for right now. I just wanted to give a shout out to our presenters today, and I want to loop back also to Catherine and the New Directions book. Our book presentation today is amazing. It has some great stories in it, but there's more stories to be told. And we're really thankful for New Directions for allowing ACPA and ASH and STAR Scholars to collaborate to add some more voices to the story. I would ask that you all please consider joining us for more information there. So as our time's coming to an end, we want to thank our presenters and our audience for giving us their time and commitment to this work. We'd also like to remind everyone that we're not done. Next week on Friday, April 19th, we'll have another colloquium session titled Passing, Learning to Navigate White Identity in America. And we hope that you will please consider joining us again for that session.
Great, and I'll also take this opportunity to remind all of you that you have an opportunity to receive a certificate of completion. All you have to do is attend 3 out of the 4 sessions as part of this colloquium. And I'm going to drop some links here in chat in a moment and sign up to receive the certificate. And we will see you hopefully next time. And thank you once again for joining us today. We really look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, folks. We will quickly edit the link. Yeah, we'll quickly edit the link.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Did you drop the links already?
It will be the same link, and all I'm going to do is behind the scenes change the permissions on it. Okay, so it should be the same link.
Okay, so will it be sent to us in our emails? So we can just register and join the next one?
Sure. Yes, that's
Okay.
a good idea. I can follow up with an email. Thank you.
Okay, then. Thank you so much.
My personal gratitude to Gudrun